Tiers are a concept often thrown around within the Yu-Gi-Oh community. Tier 0 especially is a term often misused, in my opinion. Only a few decks are actually definitively classifiable as Tier 0 within the card game's entire lifespan. And I feel like the term Tier 0 gets thrown around a tad too much. For the most part, the concept of Tier 0 is a non-opposable force, a deck that you must be playing in order to achieve good performance in most cases, barring obvious outliers. Decks this incredibly strong in relation to the other decks within the formats are very rare, and when they occur, the community is generally quite vocal about it, and they very much so dislike it. Prior examples of Tier 0 can be seen in Zodiac, Pepe, Spiral, and Necros. However, there was a format long before these where, in my opinion, the most iconic Tier 0 deck of all time thrived, arguably defining Tier 0 within the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! The date was September of 2008, and the deck is known as Tele-Dad. The story begins with the release of an incredibly iconic set being Phantom Darkness. Introducing cards like Allure of Darkness, Dark Grepher, Armageddonite, and of course Dark Armed Dragon, I don't really have to explain why the accelerated cards like Armageddonite and Grepher are strong in a format with cards like Destiny Hero, Malicious running wild. Couple these insane starter cards with the incredible power of Dark Armed Dragon, and you can really start to get the picture of how a Tier 0 threat could form. On the release of the Phantom Darkness, a deck appeared by the name of Return Dark Armed Dragon. This deck focused on controlling the game with strong dark cards like Caius the Shadow Monarch, and used the Destiny Hero engine for draw power, building up to explosive OTKs using Return from the Different Dimension. Here's a sample deck list just so you can kind of picture how the deck functioned at the time. Return Dark Armed Dragon proved to be a strong meta contender, however, certainly not too dominant. At one point, Return Dark Armed Dragon was the definitive best deck after Perfect Circle had been crippled out of relevancy. However, with the introduction of Gladiator Beasts and hard limits to cards like Return and a semi-limit to Allure of Darkness, Return Dark Armed Dragon could no longer hold the top spot. Phantom Darkness released in February of 2008. The infamous Tele-Dad format did not actually begin until September of the same year. So we can all ask, what happened during the next few months to cause this absolute powerhouse to emerge? In September of 2008, we got Synchro Summoning within the Duelist Genesis, and with it, Yu-Gi-Oh! Changed forever. The Fusion deck changed to the Extra deck, and Tuner monsters were introduced. With Duelist Genesis, Tele-Dad came to be, a variant of the previously popular Return Dark Armed Dragon, however now incorporating Synchro Summoning. Let me break it down with a standard list at the time of release. The utility of emergency teleport to summon Krebons from your deck for free proved incredibly strong in terms of utility, and in combination with Destiny Hero Malicious, meant level 8 synchro monsters like Stardust Dragon or Colossal Fighter hit the board quickly and frequently. The D-Draw paired with Allure of Darkness, along with Rhoda and cards like Stratos, also meant players would be able to find their best cards very quickly and very efficiently, digging immediately for incredible game swingers like Solemn Judgment and Crush Card Virus. Tele-Dad was an incredibly strong, incredibly consistent, and incredibly fast deck, with access to all the most powerful cards in the game at the time. All this is just a recipe for an unstoppable force. This incredible ability to dig is also incredibly important going into games 2 and 3. This made Tele-Dad probably the best deck for digging into side cards for any particular matchup, and just that increased its viability against rogue decks. The challenger within Tele-Dad proved strong but not entirely dominant out of the gate. The first SJC legal with the Duelist Genesis, Tele-Dad took a convincing amount of top cut, along with second place, only losing out to the former best deck, Gladiator Beast. It was only at SJC Baltimore that one of the biggest issues with Tele-Dad was put on full display, the unattainable nature of the deck.
And Crush Card Virus. Shout out to Ty for pulling this for us. Thank you, man. Yeah, so Crush Card Tribute a Dark to pretty much kill everything with 1500 or more attack. Oh, you have to tribute a dark with 1,000 or less. Um, really screws up your opponent. People just start cussing, crying, leaving the store when they get crush carded. It's frustrating, but dark decks can crush really, really fast, which I love about them.
I'm sure we've all experienced the problem of a deck costing far too much money to justify or afford paying for. This problem was amplified in ridiculous proportions within this format doomed to be dominated by Tele-Dad. A key card within the SJC Baltimore Tele-Dad lists was Crush Card Virus. Paired with tributes like Sangan or Malicious, Crush Card often meant the end of the game when it resolved, tearing apart the opponent's resources and putting the user at an incredible advantage. This card's strength was only really amplified by exclusivity, being in that its only two printings at the time was as a prize card and also an extremely short print run in the April 2008 Gold Series. This card, grouping with other incredibly expensive necessary cards like Dark Armed Dragon, made this deck at full power easily $2,000, a paywall that the average player simply could not or would not pay for. So we've established that the deck proved strong out of the gate, and its paywall pretty much immediately determined that if you wanted to play it, you would have to shell out an incredible amount of money. That much isn't a problem for a competitive player if you aren't forced to play the deck, and there are other cheaper options you can use to perform similarly. Unfortunately, as time went on, it became more and more clear that to do well, there were hardly any other options. 20 days after the events of SJC Baltimore, we enter SJC Tulsa, where Tele-Dad defined itself as the best deck of the format by a wide margin, taking 11 out of the top 16 spots. To top this off, the finals was a Tele-Dad mirror between Adam Korn and John Catu. The only other decks that even made waves at this event was Lightsworn, taking 3 of the top 16 spots. The deck that seized the last event, Gladiator Beast, was nowhere to be seen at SJC Tulsa, and only one Glad Beast player even made it to day 2. This was an embarrassing display, to say the least, for the former top dog of the metagame. After Tulsa came October of 2008, things only got better for Tele-Dad, and so much worse for their opponents. SJC Seattle came and went. 13 players in top 16 were playing Tele-Dad, and yet another Tele-Dad mirror match was the finals. This time, Cesar Gonzalez took it all. SJC Charlotte followed Seattle, and it became more and more clear that the future for any deck that other than Tele-Dad was certainly not bright. 15 out of the top 16 was Tele-Dad, with one lone Lightsworn making the cut. This time, Justin Arnwine took the event, with the deck everyone would expect to, Tele-Dad. And after SJC Charlotte, Crossroads of Chaos was introduced, and though it came with some big boosts in power to decks like Lightsworn within Plague Spreader Zombie and Black Rose Dragon, the standard build for Tele-Dad was hardly affected, and it continued on its domination of the format. An extremely important tech that was released shortly after Crossroads was Gores, the Emissary of Darkness, a gameplay warping staple that changed the way players played the game from then on. However, it did not directly shift the metagame away from Tele-Dad, obviously. The rest of 2008, for the most part, was more of the same, and Tele-Dad continued flexing its muscles, taking every SJC for the rest of the year. January held the infamous Forgotten SJC, and doing research into this event specifically was rather difficult, as in comparison to the others, it had much less coverage and for the most part flew under the radar. From my research, I have found this was mostly due to the issues Konami was having with Upper Deck Entertainment at the time, and the legal proceedings to reprocess the game interrupted some of the coverage specifically for this event. Nevertheless, there were people at this event taking notes of the results, and besides the obvious continued dominance of Tele-Dad, a painful tech began to enter the main deck, that being Royal Oppression. And Oppression is obviously an incredibly strong and toxic floodgate, especially for a deck like Tele-Dad that summons so much. A player going first and drawing Oppression in the Tele-Dad mirror could very well immediately win the game, especially when the oppression is backed up by a Stardust Dragon or Solemn Judgment. An important note, following SJC Houston, there was a lack of SJCs for 3 months as Konami halted events due to the legal issues they were involved in against Upper Deck. In the meantime, UDE Day events continued as Upper Deck began unloading incredible amounts of prizing across the USA before they were cut off from the Yu-Gi-Oh licensing. As far as interesting things happening in the metagame from here on within the Tele-Dad format, there isn't too much to tell. Tele-Dad continued dominance, with rogue challengers like Lightsworn, Gladbeast, and Zombie popping up here and there. It is also noteworthy that the meta did continue to warp with oppression, becoming so popular within the metagame, causing a much less conservative mirror match, as you couldn't risk waiting to summon big synchros, as it could play into your opponent's oppression. One of the big reasons that Tele-Dad was widely considered an incredibly skillful format was due to all the technical play within the mirror, and this was displayed with the incredibly consistent performance by the top players of the time. Some actually won multiple SJC titles within the format. So what finally shut down this Tier 0 monster of a deck? The only things that ever really can: a ban list. So, now we entered the ban list of March 2009. This ban list was Konami apologizing to the player base for the months of Tier 0 agony they put them through. Konami took an axe to everything that was Tele-Dad, abolishing it from the meta entirely. Konami limited Dad, limited Goyo, limited Plague Spreader, limited e-tele, limited Rhoda, semi-limited Allure of Darkness, Malicious, and D-Draw. And with this, the reign of Tele-Dad came to an end. Konami slaughtered the deck as it was, leaving it virtually unplayable, sending a message to the player base on how they felt about the existence of a deck as dominant as Tele-Dad was. And that's the story of Tele-Dad for the most part. In my opinion, the true definition of a Tier 0 force. I really hope you guys enjoyed the retelling. And if you enjoy history videos like this, please let me know. I love doing research for stuff like this. It's so fun to look into and write up. I appreciate the time y'all gave me by listening. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.